The date is July 24, 1944, and Commander Daspit is standing in the conning tower of USS Tynosa, somewhere in the East China Sea, listening to the sound of his own torpedoes doing nothing. Not exploding, not tearing through steel. Nothing. The dull, flat knock of a warhead striking the hull of the largest whale factory ship in the Japanese merchant fleet, a vessel called Tonan Maru No. 3, displacing 19,000 tons, sitting almost dead in the water. And then, silence. He fires once. Silence. He fires again. Silence. Over the next several hours, Commander Daspit expends 14 additional torpedoes against a target that is, for all practical purposes, stationary. He is a skilled commander on one of the most capable submarines in the Pacific Fleet. The target is enormous, and it is not moving. The torpedoes are striking the hull. Every single one of them fails to detonate. Daspit does something that almost no commander in the history of the United States Navy had ever done in a combat situation. He saves the last torpedo. He does not fire it. He turns the Tynosa around, and he brings that single unfired torpedo all the way back to Pearl Harbor as evidence, because he understands in that moment that no written report will be believed without physical proof, and that whatever is wrong with American torpedoes is so profoundly, systematically wrong that someone needs to hold the broken thing in their hands before they will accept that it is broken. What he could not have known, standing in that conning tower with the smell of recycled air and machine oil and the particular tension of a crew that has just watched 14 weapons fail in sequence, was that the answer his torpedo would eventually provide would come too late to save the deadliest American submarine of the entire war. A submarine that would be destroyed not by depth charges, not by aircraft, not by any enemy weapon at all. The weapon that wasn't. The Mark 14 torpedo was the standard American submarine torpedo of the Second World War. It entered service in 1931, cost roughly $10,000 per unit, which in today's money is something close to $200,000, weighed 3,280 pounds fully loaded, and was designed to run at either 46 knots on a short setting or 31.5 knots on a long setting, with an effective range of 4,500 yards at the high speed and 9,000 yards at the low. On paper, it was a formidable weapon. The problem is that weapons that work on paper do not always work in water. The Mark 14 had 4 separate and distinct defects. 4, not 1. Not a manufacturing variance that slipped through quality control on a bad Tuesday. 4 systematic, documented, catastrophic failures built into a weapon that American submariners were expected to bet their lives on every time they went to sea. The first defect was depth control. The Mark 14 ran deep, not a little deep, not a few feet off. It ran an average of 11 feet deeper than its set depth, which meant that torpedoes aimed at the keel of a Japanese ship were passing harmlessly beneath the hull. Submariners were reporting this from the first months of the war. Their commanders told them they were firing incorrectly. The Bureau of Ordnance told them the Mark 14 was a precision instrument, and the problem was with the crews. This argument continued for 18 months. 18 months of failed attacks, wasted torpedoes, and Japanese ships sailing away while American submariners were blamed for their own defective equipment. The second defect was the magnetic exploder. The Mark 14 was designed to detonate beneath a ship's hull, triggered by the change in the magnetic field of the Earth near a large iron structure. It was a clever idea. In practice, the exploder was calibrated for the magnetic signature of the Atlantic and North Sea. In the Pacific, near the equator, the magnetic field was weaker, and the exploder was too sensitive. It would detonate prematurely before reaching the target or not at all. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Pacific Submarine Forces, ordered the magnetic exploders disabled in June of 1943. That was 2 years into the war. The third defect was the contact exploder. When the magnetic exploder failed, submariners relied on the backup, a simple contact pin that would detonate the warhead when the torpedo struck something solid. The contact exploder on the Mark 14 was designed to work at any angle. In practice, it worked only at oblique angles. If a torpedo struck a target at a perpendicular angle, a perfect 90-degree hit, the shot every torpedo man aimed for, the firing pin would crumple without firing. The harder the hit, the more likely the dud. Submariners were reporting this. The Bureau of Ordnance spent most of 1942 and 1943 telling them they were wrong. In September of 1943, tests at Pearl Harbor confirmed the contact exploder failed under perpendicular impact. The fix took 6 weeks. For 2 years, American submariners had been firing perfect shots and watching them do nothing. The fourth defect was the gyroscope. Four separate defects. In the primary offensive weapon of the United States submarine force, in a war where the margin between victory and survival was measured in seconds and yards. The gyroscope defect was different from the others in one critical way. The first 3 defects meant torpedoes that missed. The fourth defect meant torpedoes that came back. The Mark 14's gyroscope controlled the weapon's steering. It was supposed to lock the torpedo onto its preset course at the moment of launch and hold it there through the entire run. When it worked perfectly. When it failed, and under certain conditions it could fail, the torpedo would enter what engineers called a circular run. It would lose its preset heading, begin to arc, and follow the arc in a complete circle, or close enough to one that the result was the same. The submarine that fired it was, by definition, in that circle. Here is the geometry of the problem. A submarine firing a torpedo is moving forward. The torpedo is fired forward. The torpedo is faster than the submarine. Under normal circumstances, the torpedo pulls ahead, runs toward the target, and the submarine is never in any danger from its own weapon. But if the torpedo begins to circle, if it turns left or right instead of running straight, it can complete enough of that arc to come back around and strike the submarine from behind or the side, in the exact position the submarine has moved to in the seconds since firing. The run time for a Mark 14 at high speed, over a distance that would allow a full circle back to the firing position, was somewhere between 30 and 90 seconds, depending on the initial heading and the radius of the circle. 30 to 90 seconds. That is how long a crew had between firing and potential impact if the gyroscope failed. They would have heard nothing. The torpedo ran too fast, and the submarine's own noise was too loud. They would have had no warning.
Перечитай эту строчку еще раз.
They would have had no warning. The Navy knew circular runs happened. They were documented in training. They were documented in combat reports. Between 1941 and 1944, at least 5 American submarines reported suspected circular runs that resulted in close calls, torpedoes that passed near the hull, that were heard circling back, that required emergency maneuvers to avoid. The standard protocol when a circular run was suspected was to go to full speed and turn hard, trying to clear the arc before the torpedo completed it. The protocol assumed you knew the torpedo was running in a circle. If you didn't know, if the gyroscope failure was silent, if the torpedo simply curved away and came back without any acoustic signature distinguishable from the surrounding ocean, there was no protocol. There was only the explosion. Tullaby's War. USS Tullaby was commissioned on the 12th of February 1943 at the Electric Boat Company shipyard in Groton, Connecticut. She was a Below-class fleet submarine, 311 feet long, displacing 1,526 tons surfaced and 2,415 tons submerged. She could make 20 1/4 knots on the surface and 8 3/4 submerged. She carried 24 torpedoes, 10 forward tubes and 4 aft, and a crew of 80 men. She went to the Pacific under the command of Commander Charles Brindapke, 32 years old, born in Marysville, Kansas, Naval Academy class of 1933. A careful officer by the accounts of his commanders, methodical, not the kind of man who took unnecessary risks. Tullaby's first patrol, in the summer of 1943, was largely uneventful. She sank one ship, a small cargo vessel, and returned to Pearl Harbor. Her second patrol that autumn produced no confirmed kills. Her third patrol, beginning in January of 1944, was different. In the waters around Truk Lagoon, the great Japanese naval base in the Caroline Islands, Talibai engaged a Japanese convoy on the 23rd of March 1944. She fired 4 torpedoes and sank the Hokusen Maru, a transport of 6,786 tons carrying supplies and personnel. This was a confirmed kill. Talibai was now a ship with a record, and her crew had become what submariners became when they had drawn blood in the Pacific. Very careful, very competent, and very aware that the ocean was trying to kill them. She returned to Pearl, she was refitted, she was sent out again. Her fourth patrol began on the 5th of March 1944. She was operating as part of a coordinated wolf pack, a tactic the Americans had borrowed and adapted from the Germans, hunting Japanese shipping in the waters west of the Marianas. Her assigned partner in this patrol was USS Halibut. The patrol area was roughly bounded by the Philippines to the west, the Marianas to the east, and the waters between. Hundreds of miles of open Pacific that Japanese convoys crossed regularly, moving troops and supplies between the home islands and the outer empire. Talibai's job was to find those convoys and destroy them. Na этот раз самое важное. In the night of the 26th of March 1944, Talibai made contact with a Japanese convoy. The convoy included at least one large transport, later identified as the Sakito Maru, a transport of 7,179 tons, and its escorts. Brindupke brought Talibai to the surface for a night attack. This was standard practice. Surface attacks at night offered better speed, better visibility through the periscope, and a more stable firing platform. Talibai fired 2 torpedoes. What happened next is reconstructed from the single surviving witness, gunner's mate 3rd Class Clifford Kuykendall, who was on deck when the attack occurred. He heard the torpedoes fire, he felt the submarine moving, adjusting position, and then, somewhere between 30 and 90 seconds after the first torpedoes left the tubes, there was an explosion. Not ahead of the submarine, not at the convoy, at the submarine. The blast threw Kuykendall into the water. When he surfaced, Talibai was gone. Not damaged, not sinking slowly. Gone. In the time it takes a man to surface from being thrown into the ocean, the submarine had been destroyed so completely that Kuykendall, treading water in the darkness, could find no other survivors. He would search for hours. He would find nothing. 80 men. Gone. Kuykendall was picked up by a Japanese destroyer escort the following morning. He spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of war, first in Truk, then in Japan. He survived the camps. He came home in September of 1945. He was the only man from Talibai who did. Здесь ключевая деталь. When the Navy received Kuykendall's account after his liberation, the description of the explosion, its timing, its location relative to the submarine, the absence of any preceding impacts on the convoy, was consistent with exactly one scenario, a circular run. One of Talibai's own torpedoes, its gyroscope having failed at the moment of launch, had turned, arced, and returned to find the submarine. The investigation could not be conclusive. There was one witness, and he had been in the water, not in the control room. He could not describe what the torpedo did between leaving the tube and striking the hull. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, and the Navy's official conclusion, recorded in the patrol report filed after Kuykendall's debriefing, listed the probable cause of loss as circular run by own torpedo. Если это расследование дает тебе более ясную картину того, как американские подводники воевали в Тихом океане, не той версии, которая выжила в парадных рапортах, а той, которую люди записывали, когда думали, что их никто важный не читает, нажми на лайк. Это помогает удержать эту историю на виду чуть дольше, и это имеет значение. Часть 3. The Graveyard of the Gyroscope. Talibai was not the first, she was not the last. Between the beginning of the war and the summer of 1944, the Navy's own records documented at least 9 instances of suspected circular torpedo runs in combat conditions. Some of these were near misses, submarines that heard the torpedo coming back, or that saw the wake, or that felt it pass close enough to shake the hull and managed to maneuver clear. Some were ambiguous, submarines lost under circumstances where a circular run could not be ruled out, but could not be confirmed. And then there was USS Tang. Poznakomi się z komandorem Richardem Hilleyem. O'Kane, 33 lata, urodzony w Durham, New Hampshire. Przed wojną oficer regularny, absolwent Akademii Marynarki z klasy 1934 roku. Przez pierwsze 2 lata wojny służył jako zastępca dowódcy na USS Wahoo pod komendą legendarnego Dudleya Mortona, gdzie nauczył się agresywnego, bliskiego stylu atakowania, który Morton uczynił swoim znakiem rozpoznawczym. Wait, let me stay in English. The story demands it. Meet Commander Richard Hilley O'Kane, 33 years old, from Durham, New Hampshire, Naval Academy class of 1934. Before the war, a regular line officer. During the first 2 years of the war, executive officer on USS Wahoo under the command of Commander Dudley Morton, where he served in some of the most aggressive submarine attacks of the early Pacific campaign. O'Kane received his own command in January of 1944, USS Tang, SS-306, a Balao-class submarine, same class as Tulibi. Tang's first 3 patrols under O'Kane were extraordinary. In the waters around Truk, around the Marianas, along the Japanese shipping lanes, Tang sank ship after ship. By the autumn of 1944, O'Kane and his crew had sent 31 Japanese vessels to the bottom, totaling approximately 116,000 tons. In a war where a single confirmed sinking per patrol was considered a productive deployment, O'Kane was in a category almost by himself. On the 24th of October 1944, Tang was operating in the Formosa Strait. She had already sunk several ships in this patrol. She was firing at a Japanese convoy in the dark, running at the surface, O'Kane conning the ship himself from the bridge, when he fired what would become the most consequential torpedo of his career. It was the 24th torpedo of the patrol, the last one Tang carried. It left the tube, it ran for a few seconds, and then it began to curve. O'Kane saw the phosphorescent wake, the pale green trail that fast-moving torpedoes leave in warm Pacific water, and he saw it doing something it should not do. It was not running straight, it was turning, and it was turning back. He ordered emergency speed. Emergency turn. He did everything the protocol said to do when a circular run is spotted. It was not enough. The torpedo struck Tang from behind in the stern. The explosion was catastrophic. Tang went down in less than a minute. O'Kane, on the bridge, was blown into the water. He survived. 13 other men survived the initial sinking and managed to reach the surface. Of those, 9 were captured by Japanese vessels and survived the war as prisoners of war. O'Kane was one of them. The final count for USS Tang: 33 ships sunk, totaling approximately 116,000 tons of Japanese shipping. Every record confirmed, every figure in the official ledger. Sunk by torpedo number 24. Her own. Astanavis I padumaj об этом. 2 submarines, 2 circular runs, 2 ships destroyed not by the enemy they were hunting, but by the weapons they carried. And these are only the confirmed cases, the ones where a survivor existed to describe what happened, where the evidence was unambiguous enough to put in the official record. The list of submarines lost to unknown causes in the Pacific is 32 vessels. 32 submarines that went out and did not come back, whose loss was recorded as cause unknown or presumed lost to enemy action. How many of them were Tulibis? How many were Tangs? No one knows. That is the answer. No one knows. And вот что упустили все. The circular run problem was not a mystery. It was not an engineering puzzle that defied solution. The conditions under which a Mark 14 gyroscope could fail and produce a circular run were documented. The failure mode was understood. The Navy knew that if a gyroscope bearing was worn, or if the gyroscope was not properly spun up before firing, or if the firing mechanism subjected the gyroscope to a specific kind of lateral shock at launch, the result could be a torpedo that did not hold its heading. They knew, and the fix was not complicated. Improved quality control on gyroscope manufacture, revised pre-launch inspection procedures, a modified firing mechanism that reduced the shock load at the moment of launch. These fixes were implemented, eventually, after Talibi, after Tang, after whatever other submarines may have died the same way, without leaving a single man alive to explain it. The question that the official record does not answer, and that no subsequent inquiry has fully addressed, is why it took so long. The circular run problem was documented in training incidents before the war. It appeared in combat reports from 1942. The 4 defects of the Mark 14, the depth problem, the magnetic exploder, the contact exploder, the gyroscope, were all known within the first year of the war. The Bureau of Ordnance spent most of 1942 defending the Mark 14 against criticism from the men who were firing it in combat and watching it fail. This is not a story about incompetence in the ordinary sense. The engineers at the Bureau of Ordnance were not stupid. The admirals who defended the Mark 14 were not cowards. What they were was institutionally captured, unable or unwilling to accept that a weapon they had spent years developing and millions of dollars producing was fundamentally broken. The psychological cost of admitting that was too high, so they blamed the crews instead. Перечитай эту строчку еще раз. They blamed the crews instead. Часть 4. The forensic verdict. Here is the forensic verdict of this investigation. USS Talibi was sunk on the 26th of March 1944 with the loss of 79 men. The proximate cause was a circular run by one of her own Mark 14 torpedoes. The gyroscope of that torpedo failed at or shortly after launch, causing the weapon to arc and return to the firing position. The submarine had no warning and no time to maneuver. The explosion was catastrophic and immediate. But the proximate cause is not the whole story. The underlying cause was a systemic failure of the United States Navy's torpedo procurement and quality assurance system, compounded by institutional resistance to acknowledging that failure over a period of roughly 2 years. The Mark 14 was defective in 4 documented ways from the beginning of the war. Each defect was identified by the crews using the weapon in combat. Each identification was initially rejected by the Bureau of Ordnance. Each rejection cost time. Each month of delay cost ships. Some of those ships came back, some did not. Talibi did not. Now consider what Clifford Kuykendall carried out of the Philippine Sea. He was 23 years old when Talibi went down. He was a gas station attendant from Danville, Illinois. He had been trained to operate weapons, to maintain equipment, to serve as part of a crew. He had not been told, could not have been told, that the weapon his ship carried had a documented failure mode that could kill everyone aboard. That was not information that filtered down to gunner's mate 3rd Class Clifford Kuykendall. He spent the rest of the war as a prisoner. He came home in September of 1945. He gave his account to the Navy. His account became the foundation of the official finding. He is the reason we know what happened to Talibi at all. He died in 1992 in Illinois. He was 71 years old. He had lived 48 years with the knowledge that he was the only man from his ship who came home. A теперь самое важное. Richard O'Kane survived the sinking of Tang, survived Japanese captivity, and returned to the United States in September of 1945. He received the Medal of Honor, the citation describing his conduct over Tang's 5 patrols. The ships sunk, the attacks pressed home in close range, the men saved from the water of a Japanese-occupied harbor during one of the most audacious rescue operations of the submarine war. He retired from the Navy as a rear admiral. He wrote a memoir, Wahoo, about his time as executive officer under Morton, and another, Clear the Bridge, about his command of Tang. He died on the 16th of February 1994 in Petaluma, California. He was 83 years old. In Clear the Bridge, O'Kane described the moment he saw the torpedo's wake turning. He described the orders he gave. He described the sound of the explosion and the water coming up to meet him. He wrote about it with the same technical precision he brought to everything, the bearing, the estimated radius of the arc, the seconds between the order and the impact. He did not editorialize, he did not assign blame, he described what he saw and what he did and what happened. That restraint, in a man who had every reason to be furious, says something. The Mark 14's circular run problem was resolved by the middle of 1944. Improved gyroscope inspection protocols, modified firing mechanisms, revised pre-launch procedures. The fixes were not radical, they were not expensive relative to the cost of the torpedoes themselves. They were the kind of changes that could have been implemented in 1942 if the Bureau of Ordnance had been willing to listen to the men in the water, telling them the weapon did not work. Сосчитай это сам. 32 American submarines were lost in the Pacific with cause listed as unknown or enemy action. We know of 2, Tullabee and Tang, where a circular run is the confirmed or highly probable cause. Even if those 2 are the only ones, that is 153 American submariners killed by their own weapons. If even 2 or 3 more of those 32 unknowns were circular runs, and the probability is not negligible, the number rises above 200. 200 men, killed by a defect that was documented, that was reported, that was dismissed. There is a memorial to the submarine service at the Submarine Force Museum in Groton, Connecticut, the same yard where Tullabee was built. It lists the names of the 52 American submarines lost in the Second World War, and the names of the men who went down with them. Tullabee is there. The 79 names are there. The memorial does not specify cause of loss. It does not have to. The names are enough. But here is the thing about Clifford Kuykendall, the gas station attendant from Danville, Illinois, who clung to debris in the Philippine Sea while the sun came up and found no one else alive. He came home, he told the story. He told it accurately, without embellishment, without drama, to a Navy debriefer who wrote it into a report that became the official record of what happened to USS Tullabee. He did not know, in the moment he gave that account, that his words would be the only evidence available. He did not know that 79 names on a memorial in Connecticut would rest, in part, on what he remembered from the water. He just told the truth about what he heard and what he saw. That truth, fragmentary, imperfect, belonging to a man who had every reason to be broken and chose instead to be precise, is the reason Tullabee is listed as lost to a circular run rather than lost to unknown causes. It is the reason the investigation had a conclusion at all. It is the reason the Navy eventually fixed the gyroscope protocol in time for the last year of the war, in time for the submarines that came after. Tullabee went down because a torpedo turned. The torpedo turned because a gyroscope failed. The gyroscope failed because a procurement system chose institutional comfort over operational truth for 2 years, while the men it was supposed to arm went to sea with weapons they could not fully trust. And the only man who came back was the one who told the truth about it. That is what the Philippine Sea gave us on the morning of the 27th of March 1944. One survivor, one account, 79 names on a wall in Connecticut, and a Navy that finally, after 2 years and God knows how many dead, decided to listen. If this investigation gave you something, a clearer picture of what American submariners faced in the Pacific, not the version that survived in the official commendations, but the version that lives in a single debriefer's transcript from September of 1945, press like. It keeps this story visible a little longer. And subscribe if you want the next one. The weapon turned. The weapon always had the capacity to turn. Someone knew, and for 2 years, no one with the authority to fix it chose to act. Clifford Kuykendall told the truth from the water. The least we can do is remember it.